Kirti ji, everybody can see you. You need to unmute yourself to talk. Kirti ji, unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself, sir. We can't hear you.
Hello.
Yes, Kirti ji.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you. Job, sir, you need to unmute yourself to talk, sir.
Is Geoff joined?
Yes,
Yes, I've joined and I've just forwarded the new link to Tony Lloyd-Jones, who was contacting me to say he was trying to link in but unable to. So
Has everyone joined then?
Tony's going to try and join as well. Yes, he just phoned me to say he couldn't
everyone
get on.
Kimia,
Well,
is
we seem
everyone
to have
on?
quite a few.
Yes, Kirti ji. Everybody's here. People are joining in.
Okay, so shall we start then?
Yes, I guess. It's on you guys.
Geoff, can we start this?
Yes, by all means. I think quite a few have joined. How many do we have at the moment?
I'm extremely sorry.
We have, sir, around 20 people.
Yeah, okay. So let me start. I think, thank you very much. And I'm extremely sorry that we've been delayed and there have been some problem with our technology. I'm extremely sorry. So friends and colleagues, welcome to this two-part meeting to remember John Turner. We are delighted that you are here to give tribute to this very, very special person. We have many reasons to remember him, and we will hear from his colleagues and friends and followers as in the next 2 hours from them. Now let us start. To me, John thought out of box. He redefined community housing, gave a new direction to thinking, planning, policies, and programs for housing of the poor, gave academic and researchers a new dimension for exploration. He gave substance to the bottom-up perspective and new idiom to planning from below. By saying that slums are solutions, not only a problem, he pointed to a hidden, unrecognized resource, gave value to people's, that is common people's, that is poor people's talent, creativity, desire, and ability to find solutions to their own problem. Having made housing a people sector activity, a community sector activity, what is normally a private sector and public sector activity. My personal journey, almost on a parallel track, was not based on what one saw in city slums. It was in Indian villages, and that's a staggering large number. India has 638,000 villages, and over 900 to 1,000 million people live there. Total housing stock of about 160 to 170 million people. Housing stock, 70% of that is made by people with their own hands, with their own plan, with their own labor, with their own supervision, and often with their own finances. And therefore, there could not be a bigger, more convincing evidence that people know how to build, not only in India, in the entire Southeast Asia, and as a matter of fact, everywhere in the world. My third point is this: there are reasons to remember to him again, go back on what he said, he wrote, what he taught, and what he argued. Housing is now less a people sector activity than before. It's a market driven completely. It's now FSI, now real estate, now high profit. John Turner, in many ways, is an old generation person.
I'll send you a new link.
Though relevant, is not in public memory. And I'm not surprised that he's not in public memory, because talking to some postgraduate students of planning in Pune last month, I asked them about Gandhi because it was Gandhi's birthday, and not many could talk about Gandhi. If Gandhi could be forgotten so early in India, I'm sure there's a reason why we could forget about John, and therefore there's a great need to remember John again. The fourth reason why we are doing this particular meeting is this, and that INHAF took this initiative because for the last 2 years, we have been running a webinar series called Rethinking Cities. We already completed 95 webinars on the subject. We therefore had a platform ready. We knew the mechanism of running it, and we thought this will be a good opportunity to kind of remember and use this platform for John Turner. And of course, we had a good reason. We on our own could not have done this. Geoffrey Payne came in. He said he will be most willing to help organizing this, and therefore we ventured to organize this two-part webinar series. And lastly, there is one more reason why we are doing this. I thought we would use this opportunity to get people working on this subject together. Explore if they would agree to work together on reseeing, reassessing the community housing challenge. Things have changed since John's days. Cities, technologies, politics, and mindsets have changed dramatically. And a large number of people are still homeless, still inadequately sheltered. Much remains to be done. And we thought we could use this opportunity to bring back people on a platform and explore if there is something we could do together. We also suggested, and Geoff agreed wholeheartedly, that we could begin with maybe a series of webinars in the context of housing in the last 30, 40 years and see what is possible to do in this new world, in these new technologies and the new cities. So that is a brief introduction, and I hand this over to Joe Payne to take this further, bring in other friends to kind of share their thoughts and ideas on John Turner, and let us hear him on what they thought about him and his contribution. So thank you very much, Jeff, to you to continue this discussion.
Well, thanks very much, Kirti, and for the initiative of undertaking and launching these webinars and the other ideas that you've got. You never stop with positive ideas for taking issues forward. So that I think we all owe you a great debt of thanks for that. I first became aware of John when I was completing my architecture studies in 1968. When he published an article in Architecture Design saying that squatter housing, I'm going to mute my phone, when he was saying that squatter housing was an architecture that works, and I still have the original copy of that journal in my hand, and I've kept lots of the others since that time. Monica Pidgeon was a brilliant editor of a journal that really raised all the issues of housing, which for architects who've been trained to admire and respect Mies van der Rohe, Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, all the great architects, for me this was such a liberating experience, was that here was an architect who was actually talking about people, not just about built form and the proportions and the synergies of a building, but talking about what buildings meant to people. And this really was very exciting for me, and was one of the factors that encouraged me to go and apply for a Commonwealth scholarship. And I went to India in 1970, and I spent a year and a half looking at and studying and living partly, not on and off, with the people in a couple of slum settlements. And that's when I really became so aware of the resourcefulness, the resilience, and the creativity of people in vulnerable communities. Absolutely amazing. And then I went to Turkey, and Ankara at that time in the 1970s had the highest proportion of any capital city in the world of so-called unplanned slums. But of course, what John was demonstrating, and what I think all of us now accept and acknowledge, is that these were not unplanned settlements. They were planned according to the criteria, the priorities, the resources and needs of the people themselves. What John did, as Kirti said, was to demonstrate with his colleagues, Lisa Peaty and William Mangin, that squatter housing wasn't so much a problem as a resource. Now, John, of course, as suppose many of us know, was immensely influenced by the ideas of Patrick Geddes, the conservative surgery approach, and also by Colin Ward, the editor of the anarchist journal Freedom. However, it was his first-hand experience in Peru, where migrants to urban areas were building houses and complete settlements, that led him to call for a new approach. And he argued that professionals should stop imposing inappropriate and unaffordable policies and develop new ones based on the considerations defined by the real experts. No, sorry about my phone going. But instead of seeing the world in conventional terms, as Kirti said, of left or right wing, John saw power relations in terms, as we know, of top down and bottom up, and he strongly advocated the latter. I think in many ways he felt misunderstood because in many times later on, he was very, very keen to be very precise in terminology. And felt that he was really determined that his ideas would be seen not as conventional left-right, but in terms of a new approach of up-down. And I think, as we can see from the experience of China, for example, state systems of management of the housing sector have not exactly been a great success. And it's equally clear from the experience of the UK and many other countries that the market is not meeting the needs of most people. And this is why I think we really need to strengthen the role of communities. Now, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been getting much more involved in these issues locally in my own corner of the woods, neck of the woods in West London. And I'm finding it really, really interesting how challenging it is for communities to assert any degree of influence over what's happening in our own areas, even though the government accepts that the housing market is broken. So it does demonstrate, I think, that what John was fighting for is an ongoing battle, that we all need to be picking up the ideas and pressing hard for them to be going forward. Now, I was very proud to be invited to write an obituary for John in the Guardian newspaper, and I think it was partly responsible for the massive response at that, plus other postings by many of you on social media that prompted Kirti to kindly organize these webinars. So in a way, it's a really nice thought that even after his death, John continues to promote collaboration, bring people together, promote ideas of a progressive nature, and that would be a legacy that would probably embarrass him as much as it gratified him. Now, we've received a lot of messages of sympathy and support for the causes that John championed. And this has been a great consolation for his family, and particularly his wife, Beth, who is also in her mid-90s, and who collaborated with John and edited a book, which I'm sure many of you know about, which carries the issues forward and provides lots of examples of the sort of ideas that they were talking about. So I was very, very lucky when I'd come back from doing my research in India and in Turkey. I was based at DPU and the AA for a while, and I was very, very privileged to be John's deputy director on a mid-career short course that he was directing for senior officials coming from urbanizing countries. And this was all about his ideas of participatory development, community building, and so on. And I'll never forget that when he started this 3-month course, he gave his talk with passion and clarity and good examples of the need for us all to work together and to collaborate, and for communities to strengthen their role in the development process. And at the end of the lecture, he said, right, well, it's been an hour and a half, it's now 11 o'clock, let's stop for tea and coffee. And everybody sat there. Obviously, we realized very, very quickly, expecting the door to open and someone to come in with a trolley with tea and coffee and biscuits on it. And as soon as he realized that, John said, right, well, who's going to go and buy the tea and coffee? Who's going to do the washing up? And who's going to look after everything else? And the shock on their face demonstrated very, very clearly that John wasn't an academic who just spoke good words. He actually meant it and lived it. And it was amazing, because I don't know what they got out of the course, but within days, they were all laughing and bantering with each other in the kitchen as good friends. So he actually put into practice what he'd been talking about in terms of housing. So I'd like now to express with Kirti our great thanks to everyone who's responded to this invitation and offered to contribute. So with that, I'd like to thank them and invite Pat Wakely, who was a long-term director at the DPU, to take up the baton and make your contribution, Pat. Many thanks, and over to you. You need to unmute, Pat.
Oh, I've got to unmute. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction, Jeff. Great. I first met John appropriately in the mid-1960s in Ahmedabad, where we were both at a workshop organized by B.V. Doshi, the director of the Center for Environmental Planning and Technology, assisted by Dinesh Mehta. The center is now the CEPT University. Anyway, we started discussions there, but they really took off when in the early 1970s, John and Bertha, who was then called Chicky, and I still fondly think of her as Chicky. I hope she's here and listening to this. Settled in Hackney. And this then, at that stage, the conversations we were having sort of fell into two parts. John, as we know, was championing that the case, making the case for community-led incremental development, which he in those days called progressive development. And his publications reflected that, starting with a paper that he gave at a workshop or seminar in Pittsburgh in the United States, and jointly produced a paper together with Rolf Goetz called Barriers and Channels for Housing Development, in which he set out his case that Jeff has just referred to, and we know also well and why we are here. Following that, his paper became very influential. It was published in the Journal of the American Institute of Planners, and the United Nations TV Productions made a film which was scripted and directed by John, titled A Roof of My Own, about the work that he had been doing in the late 50s and early 60s in Lima, in Peru, in helping to enable people and to form communities and informing communities to create, plan, and design and create their own domestic environments and neighborhoods. The next landmark in the dissemination of John's ideas was the publication of an issue of architectural design, which was in August 1963 and cost 4 shillings. Following that, in 1972, John with Robert Frichter published a book, or an edited book, of Freedom to Build, in which John produced his, as a chapter, his well-known paper with the catchphrase, housing as a verb, not as a product, as a verb, demonstrating what housing does to people and communities rather than what it is. That has stuck. This was then followed, the Freedom to Build publication, which was enormously influential and translated into, well, at least 4 languages, I know, was in Freedom to Build was published in 1972. In 1976, John produced another book, Housing by People, Towards Autonomy in Building Environments. This was a collection of essays that he'd written and published as short articles in Architectural Design again, which was edited by his friend Monica Pigeon. Okay, throughout these publications and this, John's emphasis was on the making the case for people's community-led incremental development, which, as I mentioned, he called progressive development. And John and I, continued a discussion over subsequent years, because I felt John was always, at the background of making the case for incremental development and for community participation was the business of enabling and providing supports to enable households and communities to improve or to build and to design and locate their settlements. The cases he made very eloquently fell into 4 categories, which I've called one, the numbers case, which this was at a time when municipalities and national ministries of housing and works were demolishing slums and so on. The numbers case was showing how hangs on the dictum, if you can't beat them, join them. So use the initiative and build on the initiative and enable the initiative of people to control and manage, design, control and manage the construction of their own environments. The second is the financial case, showing that in doing this, even the poorest households and communities could mobilize in addition to their own physical energy, significant financial resources. And the third one is what I call the urban management case, or governance and management case, which was demonstrating the efficiency of the concept of subsidiarity and identifying the lowest effective level of decision-making and control, and to relieve municipal governments of their battle against, but to join and support the resource that Jeff mentioned earlier of people's own energies and so on. But, however, in our conversations, what preoccupied me was what is this support and how is it delivered? Not, John would say what needed to be done, but not how to do it. And we went on having these discussions, and that developed into a discussion of looking at 6 areas that needed to closer examination and illustration. The first being supports, how to provide supports with reference to availability or access to land and location, and dealing with conditions of tenure and the costs and controls needed to enable people to develop their environments and indeed to develop their communities as organizations that could govern and manage their own environments. And then, of course, there was the issue of financial supports and the encouragement of incremental, the encouragement of small and medium enterprises rather than major private sector engagement. And though there is space for the private sector to have a role in any market or mixed economy in enabling and supporting low-income group communities. This brings to mind the example of the aguateros in the town of Asuncion in Paraguay, which, with the support of the official water supply and sanitation agency, encouraged and supported community organizations to design, create, and manage their own connections to trunk infrastructure and providing oversight and quality control standards by the formal water agency itself that ran the trunk networks. Also, there was a need for how to go about this capacity building. This is something that I'm going on about much more recently with John, up until his death, in building the capacities of local government. Bottom up means bottom going up to formal local government and to the local representation of national line ministries who have a role in the environment. And all this came together, these discussions, in a paper that we jointly wrote, which we were invited to do by Irene Brisson as another featured edition of architectural design 50 years after the publication of John's original article in AD. However, this somehow got diverted by AD into Wiley's, who produced it as a chapter in the book Ground Rules for Humanitarian Design. Our chapter that we jointly wrote in this book still retained the title that it was meant to have as an issue 50 years after the original issue of architectural design. And it was called 50 Years of Community-Led Incremental Development, a Paradigm for Urban Housing and Placemaking. And that brings both these things, both the case, making the case, and to examining the components of enabling supports and building capacity for the different through the process of devolution and subsidiarity to the lowest effective level, so that it is controlled by the people that own, experience, and know what are their aspirations and what are their conditions. I identify their problems. And I think this is something we've got to do a lot more of, and this is something I'm pushing fairly heavily now, is going back this discussion and collecting and encouraging the compilation, analysis, and dissemination of examples where partnerships between municipal authorities and local governments and community organizations and the non-governmental organizations that support them have worked and do work. And I think we've got to go on with this. And I think this is the direction, certainly up until shortly before his death, John and I were going on from what we said in this chapter. So that is my appeal. What we've got to do is look for the things that work, certainly take on board the things that don't work, but that has the danger of remaining on paper and becoming very academic. Is what people want is not only examples to follow, but encouragement to stimulate innovation. It is innovation. It is still, sadly, it is still innovation. I think I've said enough. Jeff, back to you, and let's hear more people coming.
Thanks very much, Pat. That's really very, very good, and many important points I think you've made. I particularly like the promoting of local governments. That's an issue we're looking at, isn't it, in the UK? And multi-stakeholder partnerships, not just public-private partnerships. I think you made that point very, very clearly. And finally, for me, finding out what works and building on it is something which is easy to say, but difficult to do. But well done. Thanks very much indeed. Now, we've got Adriana Allen next on the list. I don't know if she's with us in the room. If you are, Adriana, please, over to you.
He doesn't appear to be.
She doesn't. I did send her the new link. But if she's not here, then we could send that again to her. And in the meantime, could I invite Arif Hassan, if he's with us, to join the meeting?
Geoffrey's not there too.
He's not there. Okay, well, if Kamaya could send the latest links to both of them, that would be great. And in the meantime, while we're doing that, I do know that Tony Lloyd-Jones has managed to make the jump onto the new link. So, Tony, if you're free and ready, maybe you could jump in and contribute now.
Yeah, can you see my face?
Yes.
Am I there?
Yes, you're there. You're live
Okay.
and looking great. Thanks.
Okay, Ian's not with us either. No, I take it. Ian
Davis is.
Ian David wasn't he meant to be before me? I don't mind.
No, no. You carry on anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. 10 minutes. Let's have a look. I've been, as is my way, I've been researching for this little 10 minutes on two aspects. One is the direct connection that we've had with John over the years, and that's mainly the fact that in 1999 he contributed his material to an archive at the University of Westminster, where I was based until recently, alongside the Max Lock archive, which out of which grew the Research Centre, Max Lock Centre, and our ongoing activities within and beyond and outside the university. So I don't know if Jeff remembers the first time I met him. Was in the early 1990s when he had an office at UCL, and I was doing my master's degree. But the first part of my career was as a community architect, essentially, mainly in London. So my experience was very much UK focused, but through my mate Mike Mutter, who I studied architecture with, I'd had this link with the Max Lock team that were working in Nigeria. The common ground between Max Lock group and John is really Mike Tice, who also died recently at the grand age of 96. I call them the South Sussex Mafia, because they were both based in South Sussex. And John and Mike kept in close contact. The common theme, I'm a planner now, really, is the common thread, I suppose, is Patrick Geddes, and really the influence of Patrick Geddes on how planning should be done in relation to the involvement of people in the planning process and looking at cities in their regions and their, I would call it, ecological context these days. Very important influence on us. And I would count three major influences on me. One would be Geddes through Max Lock, who put it into practice in the Middlesbrough study in the 1940s. Jane Jacobs, because I followed a career in urban design, and she is still really the leading thinker on the way that cities develop in a complex way, and John himself really in looking at bottom-up community-based housing. So as a result of my work with Max Lock team in Nigeria, I studied urban design, and then I moved into the planning field, and obviously working closely with Jeff and others, and picking up really a lot on what Pat was just talking about. I think he's covered the key points. Just looking through my mail, I see that we had discussions about the archive that went on from 1999 until recently, when it was transferred to Barcelona, which we felt sorry about, but in reality, they were much better under Catherine, much better equipped to manage the archive. So that's the best place for them. But we were in fairly continuous contact on various matters. John kept me up to date. I think the last time I actually saw him was back in 2017, and colleagues will remember the event at wasn't at the DPU, but I think the DPU organized it, where Catherine's film was shown, and John was there. That was a fantastic, event, really. Just a reminder again, in the meantime, he'd been involved in Habitat 2 and again in Habitat 3, which I didn't manage to get to. So in fairly close contact until recently, really relying on Jeff, who's been a fantastic go-between as well. I think the only thing that I wanted to make a point about really is the whole process of, I call it self-developed housing, self-built housing, incremental housing. I've got a little presentation, but I won't bother to show it because it's not really relevant. But I was asked by the RICS to talk about housing at an event organized, I think it was in Cannes or somewhere, event organized for property developers. And I did a little diagram that that showed, maybe I can show that. Let's see if I can find it. Hold on. Working online is not perfect. That's for sure. Let's see if I can. Okay, so can you see that all right?
No.
No?
Yeah.
Can see.
You can't see anything. Okay.
Oh, we can see something.
We can see it.
Yeah, I can see.
It's not a diagram.
All right. So just
Well,
this was, I love diagrams, and there were two things. One is this aspect of John's work on migration, and at the moment I'm working in Somalia, where there are literally hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people arriving in cities, and quite a different scenario perhaps to the one that John was looking at in Peru. But this I thought was a really important, and it's about the process of urban change, which I think the fact that incremental housing is rapid process, but it's an incremental process, and the meaning that has for the management of land is really, as a planner that I'm mostly involved with. Just quickly, Africa, high fertility rate, rapid urbanization, and as it says, you know, Africa's population is likely to arrive at that of Asia. So it's a massive housing issue, particularly for sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the key points is the why. Why self-build housing? It's because people can't do what we do here, which is rent, or, well, they rent, but they can't buy a place because they can't get a mortgage. They can't get a mortgage because the interest rates are so dramatically high that it's not worth it. I was told recently in Uganda, there are people who could get a mortgage, but they don't get one because they don't have a secure income. These are facts that are causing, basically, people don't have any choice but to get a piece of land and build their own house. That's my view. And the fact that all the money is in the West and in the North means that things are likely to stay the same. And the GDP, well, this one shows it's not up to date, but Africa's GDP per person is still a fraction of the rest of the world, particularly the USA and Western Europe. So this was a guess. In low-income countries, 80 to 90% of housing is incremental. And all our studies across Africa have evidence to that effect. So it's not necessarily community-based, but it's incremental, and it's something that we have to come to terms with and deal with. As they go up the scale, middle-income countries and upper-income countries, that obviously goes down, and formal market-based housing is available. So this is really just to add to the debate on the nature of housing in the world that we face at the moment. And as a planner, how do we manage this massive growth of largely low-income housing that is occurring in cities across the global south. There's an image from Caracas, which brings it home quite clearly. We use this in our work, in spatial analysis work that we carry out. We're carrying out mainly in Africa at the moment. This is a city we looked at recently in southern Nigeria. Again, 90% of the housing that's being built is what's vaguely called informal, but is essentially self-built housing. So we're using this idea in the planning work that we're doing. Obviously, the point that Pat's making about working closely with local governments is absolutely key. In Nigeria, you have to work with whatever local organizations you can find, and very often they are traditional authorities, control local neighborhoods, and they're not necessarily the most enlightened people to deal with, but that's who you have to deal with. And that's quite common in Africa. But what we look at is how places change over time and how you could intervene in this incremental housing process most effectively to ensure that proper urban services are provided for what are largely urban poor, middle classes as well, because they can't afford mortgages either. So I'll leave it at that. That's just to give you a sort of snapshot of the way that John's ideas originally on housing as a process feed into the way that we look at urban planning issues in most of the work that we do. I did my thesis in my master's degree in urban design on informal settlements in Rio de Janeiro, which is why I went to see Pat, I think, at the time. Sorry, Jeff at the time. I think I met Pat afterwards. But there a lot to be learned, obviously, from the experience of Latin America, also across Asia. There's a huge amount of experience, and somehow we have to bring it to bear, accepting that the situation is not going to change. Urbanization is occurring very rapidly. It's going to be impacted by climate change. Somalia is a good example of the sort of problems that we're likely to have to face in the future with people displaced. And the housing issue is not going to go away. It's just going to get more acute. So I'll leave it at that. I hope a sort of snapshot of how these ideas have fed into the current practice that's ongoing. Okay, Jeff, thanks.
Thanks very much indeed, Tony. If you'd like to stop sharing the screen now, that would be great. But many, many thanks. That was some really, really good points about the collaboration between John and Mike Tice and the Max Lock Institute and all the work you've been doing on incremental development. It's a sobering thought, isn't it, that these ideas we're talking about were 50 years ago, and whilst it seems so logical and sensible and appropriate, it's still a battle that in so many parts of the world we're still having to fight just to get acceptance of the idea, let alone implementation. Now, I did send messages to Arif and also Adriana. I don't know if they've been able to join us. Have they? Are they in the room? If so, yeah. Arif, yeah. Are you there?
Not yet.
No. How about Adriana? Is Adriana managed to join us?
Jeff, can I interject while you're searching?
Of course.
On the point that Tony's just made, I would posture that virtually all urban housing is incrementally developed. only a
True.
minute proportion of urban households, of the very wealthiest, can afford to acquire housing as a one-off event, that the majority of people who have secure collateral take out mortgages and incrementally acquiring their dwellings over 25 or 30 years or more. It's only those who do not have the enabling supports to guarantee their finance that have to go through the incremental process in actual construction terms. Which
Okay,
comes
thanks for that, Pat. Now, I'm
Which comes
delighted to see that our good friend Ian Davis, is waiting patiently. And so, Ian, could I pass the baton over to you for your contribution? Thanks very much indeed.
Ian, you're muted.
Please unmute
Unmute.
yourself.
Please unmute yourself.
Just unmute, Ian. Well done.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you, Pat, and thank you, Jeff, and everybody else. It's been such an interesting discussion, and Tony, all sorts of exciting points you're bringing up. I studied for a PhD in DPU from 1972, and Otto Königsberger and Duccio Turin were my supervisors. And before I'd been there, hardly a second or third tutorial, I was told to buy Freedom to Build by John, and off I went. And what an exciting read it was. And I was very anxious to meet this person and eventually did so. I can't quite remember where, but certainly when I was at the Habitat Conference in 1976 in Vancouver, there he was as a guru with a massive following. There were also Mother Teresa was there, and Ivan Ilyich and various people. But John had already achieved a huge following. It seemed to be made up of people with anarchist tendencies and people who were just architects interested in low-cost housing, and a lot of people with a strong left-wing agenda. So he was gathering up people from different backgrounds who were, as it were, behind him. And the wonderful thing was he didn't seem fazed by it at all. He seemed to keep his unassuming ways and acute modesty. So it was very nice to meet him and to say hello and so on. Later on, we formed a housing and hazards group, which Robin Spence started Intermediate Technology Development Group. And John and Andrew Mascry, who was working with him, came along. John had very wonderful interesting computer techniques using knitting needles and punch cards, and he was classifying everything. I think one of the things that engaged me about John was his deep desire to classify and put everything in boxes and try and organize those boxes, which probably only he properly understood. But it was an endless desire to sort of organize the subject. One of my most amusing times with John was in 1980, when I got an invitation out of the blue after the earthquake. I work in disaster planning and housing shelter after earthquakes. That's my background. I'm an architect by background too. And after the earthquake in 1980 in Basilicata in southern Italy, an invitation came to myself and to John, a joint invitation from a Catholic newspaper in Milan called Movimento Popolare. And they wanted us to go on a lecture tour in Milan and in different parts of Italy, ending up in Naples and in the south, talking about autonomous housing, freedom to build, and my work, which was on sheltering as a verb, not just housing as a verb. And we met up in Milan and had a very nice dinner. And off we went to Friuli, where we were both scheduled to give lectures. Well, we woke up in the morning and John had disappeared. And the organizers were deeply concerned about this as to whether he'd become ill or whatever, because he then they found out he checked out of his room. So people were perplexed. Why would John, who's come here to lecture for this group, have checked out of his room? We found out that we didn't know where he was. I went ahead and gave the lecture. I had a bit more time because John wasn't present. And sometime in the middle of the afternoon, it was discovered that John had been effectively kidnapped by a group of anarchists who wanted him to attend their conference. And so, although they hadn't paid for his flight or his hotel cost, they, as it were, usurped these Catholic group, much to their acute annoyance. And John was now attending a different conference somewhere else. And it reminded me of just how John had different followers from different groups. The anarchists saw him as a great public figure who could expand their cause, as it were. Eventually, the Catholic group regained contact with John, and he came back a bit shamefaced. But he said, "Well, if everybody wants to hear me, fine. I'm very happy to be in different groups." Off we went on our travels, and it got more and more interesting and funny as we traveled. We ended up in Naples, where the hotel only had one room with a double bed in it, and John and I were invited to share a double bed. And this caused much amusement to me. And John said, "Do you mind if we make sheet sleeping bags so that our bodies don't come into close contact?" So we both climbed into this very small double bed. And we had very close contact, but it was a very enjoyable time. John was, people couldn't quite understand what he was talking about half the time, I think, because, of course, there was a lot of translation problems. And I remember many people being perplexed as to exactly what John's messages were. What engaged me so much about John was the way he was so radical in his thinking, so turning everything upside down. I always remember there's a famous quote, which probably you all know, which is worth repeating, that there's an anecdote about John Turner. Once he visited Rio and saw some of the spontaneous favelas, and they'd been developed by the Brazilian military junta in the 1960s. And he reportedly commented, "You've shown me all the problems that are actually solutions, and you've shown me solutions that are actually the problems." And John had this wonderful way of turning things upside down and reversing things. I really enjoyed that contact with him. I felt that his books, his writings, were deservedly having a huge impact, and students from different backgrounds rallied to the cause of meeting him. He was always so welcoming at meetings. He came to many of our conferences, and we went to his, and he brought along his students. And he kept his childlike enthusiasm right to the end, and he supported people. He would write endorsement for books. He would help people. He would encourage them, and he would suggest different places where they could advance their work. And it was, for me, always a great joy to have this kind of contact with him. Modesty, unassuming, very, very perceptive, very interested in trying to crack problems. And this restlessness went right on into his time in Hastings, and in recent communications with him, he was still grappling with it until he managed to get some dementia problems. But dear John, what a blessing in all of our lives. What a fantastic influence he has been, and for good, and it will continue on. I love seeing the publicity in the Architectural Review and the AD and all the other magazines, and his books are enduring. So thank you so much for organizing this, Jeff. It's a great privilege to pay tribute to one of the really big influences on our lives, and somebody who's made a profound change. And he's managed to bring to the fore a neglected subject and give it great, great impetus as a global figure, one of the great figures of our lives. Thank you very much.
Well, it's thanks really to Kirti for organizing it, but thank you very much, Ian, for those comments. And I think what you've highlighted for me isn't just his professional contribution, which is massive in itself, but his personal modesty and his character and his warm personality, his engaging manner with people from all sides of the political, economic, academic spectrum. And I think you're right also that his focus on classification became more and more intense, I think, over the years. And for some of us, it may have been a bit of frustration, but I think he was so keen to make sure that he wasn't misunderstood. And that maybe accounts for it. But the final takeaway I take from what you're saying is for British members listening in on this, you conjure up the idea of doing a planning version of Eric and Ernie going to bed and making jokes about what's going on in the world. So that's a nice final thought to take away. But many, many thanks indeed. Now, I'm not sure if Arif and Adriana are around. While others have been talking, I've been sending them emails with the revised Zoom link. But in any case, we're very fortunate to have two more guaranteed contributors. So could I pass over the baton, please, to Luan, if you're there? Thanks very much.
Yes, indeed, Jeffrey. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, very well.
Yes. My name is Luan Deda, and I'll try in the next 10 minutes to show perhaps one of the examples of how John Turner's working life has touched and influenced, actually, whether it is community development in the country I come from, Albania, but also the personal development of the new planners and architects, which some people already mentioned earlier. For those who are not very familiar with where, let me try to share my screen briefly. For those who are not very familiar where Albania is one of the rather small countries of Southeast Europe. It was one of the former communist bloc's member countries, and as any other countries, it moved on to an open market economy in the 1990s. The story that I'd like to share with you is obviously the rise of the informal settlements of Tirana. I hope you're able to see my screen. Tirana moved from this very centralized and planned planning system and controlled planning system from the authorities during the communist time in the early 1990s to the very, one would call, chaotic, unplanned, but as we'll discuss later, maybe not so much so. So these two pictures show Tirana in 1991 to the left and Tirana today, 2021, in terms of illustrating the big changes. So basically, Tirana doubled in a span of 30 years from 250,000 inhabitants to 500,000 today. This picture here, I do apologize for the quality of these images, but hopefully it conveys the message. The picture on the left shows Tirana in 1995, only 4 or 5 years after the fall of the communist bloc, and the black areas are the records of informal settlements at the time, which obviously grew even further later on. So the sketches to the right show how a city of a small size, 250,000 people, more than doubled in size and doubled in population in a very, what would think, a short period of time. So the process was pretty much similar to everywhere else in the world. There is a vacant land somewhere in the city, mainly farmland. The first brave, risk-taking settlers, they come in, they build their own, initially cardboard, cheap material shacks without any access to infrastructure whatsoever. Then when they find some sort of security, they invite their friends, families, and other people to join around and build even more solid houses when they can. They try to connect to any available infrastructure, mostly illegally, to whatever is around, so that they can start to build up their living conditions. And then obviously, as and when they can, they start to build these elements of infrastructure that, as we know in the conventional way of planning, is built beforehand. Now, this is exactly where I have been involved, and that's the sort of experience I wanted to share with. Once upon a time, 25 odd years ago, I worked for a consultancy practice called Coplan Institute for Habitat Development, which was born out of this community upgrade program, which was a Dutch program at the time. As I said, this was the map of 1995, and I've circled here this area that I'll bring as an example of the informal settlements of Tirana at the time. So basically, what we tried to do was, and this is where the influence of John Turner comes in, is that at that time, we got to know that there is this new concept of how to actually think about informal settlements. There was a lot of political reaction at the time in 1995 to condemn the illegal squatting of land, and there was authorities, as I'll show later, trying to get action to evict people. This group of people that we created at the time, influenced from this new concept of informal developments, we thought there is another way perhaps to deal with this. What if we try to work with the people in these communities, try to invest in infrastructure as much as we can, but the whole purpose of investing in this kind of infrastructure, as you can see, for instance, the roads at the top from left to right, was the kind of investment we were doing, was mainly to get the community organized in such a way that they first understand and they discuss between themselves on how to deal with the aspect of planning the future of their community, but more importantly, get them to get organized to deal, as you see with the photo to the bottom left, how to negotiate with local authorities at that time, that they are a serious partner that need to be accepted in the fabric of development of the city. It was a very successful intervention at the time, even though very challenging, because, as I said, the attitude of authorities at that time was we need to evict people who develop land illegally. And obviously that created quite a lot of social and political tensions at that time. And it convinced authorities even more so that that sort of approach was not going to work. The only way out of the situation was to get to sit down with communities and find solutions for getting them developed and being formalized. So these photos show these stages of development in the informal settlements that I worked on in Tirana. On the left-hand side, you have these initial photographs, as I mentioned, of the first early settlers, no infrastructure, even using the land as farmland around them. And then suddenly, not long than 5 to 10 years, you can see multi-story houses, very solid with block and concrete, with very solid walls and fences. I had the chance this summer to go into this same neighborhood, and I said, let's see how far this community has gone. And I was astonished. This is the conditions in that very same area. It is very important to see that in a very short period of time, that informal, what we consider to be the informal parts of the city, moved from this, in a stage of this, and then suddenly, in today's terms, and this is a 30 years period of time, which is nothing compared to many other experiences that probably most of us know, to go to this level of development. This is again some images of today in the area that I have been working on in terms of informal developments. I also managed to find a very nice swimming pool invested in the area, which I was astonished to see. So this is a picture of what has happened as part of these informal developments in Tirana. I do realize that this process is quite different from many processes in other parts of the world. And my thesis at DPU was actually, in fact, to go deep into understanding the poverty of informal settlements of Tirana, and only to realize that people's poverty comes from the fact that they had to invest themselves for everything, not just for their own house, but also for the public services they needed, the infrastructure, the roads, the connection to electricity and water. And because people value houses as their top priority, they will then neglect the investment in the education of their children, in food and nourishment and so on. So that was actually what was creating poverty. I'll go back to where I started and try to figure out what was the influence of John Turner in this whole process. Now, I have to admit, the first one is a personal one. I started to study architecture in Tirana in 1996, thinking, as many architects at that time was thinking, to be this typical architect that looked at the city from above. Jeff mentioned the Corbusier or other examples. And then came to realize in this reality of informal settlements in Tirana that there is a different role for architects and planners in today's world, at least the world that I was living in at that time, which is how to plan these simple actions with the community and actually make that very simple difference to whatever the reality was. And I feel blessed and lucky that was very early in my career, because that shaped the rest of my career development and the way I think about communities, planning and development in general. It also makes this understanding that reinforces what John Turner has been saying all the way. The informal settlements have their own unique, astute and effective planning and development system. It's not that they don't have a planning, and there is, of course, this is different from the mainstream planning and development, but by no means, in my view, inferior to it. They show that by providing a little bit of helping hand, they will lead to successful communities, as we saw from the photos. I certainly would choose today to live in an area where these informal settlements are, rather than in a very dense city center developments. And the reason being is that they have managed to create a very strong sense of community. They have a significant level of community investment, these informal settlements. People themselves invest in public services, which is very beneficial for local authorities as a whole. And they also invest in this low density development that in the long run, they maintain this very environmentally friendly form of land developments, which are, when we talk about creating good places, these are the good places. And these have been built by people who knew nothing about planning, whilst in comparison, other developments that have been built by architects and planners do not even manage to get anywhere near to the quality of places that they have created. Of course, they do come with challenges. The political aspect is one of the big challenges. The land restitution process is the biggest hot potato that people leave it at the end because no one can deal with. And of course, the other political aspects of getting to recognize people who have developed land illegally is not an easy task to deal with. So, and obviously this has also generated a lot of publication and research. And I remember from Copland at the time, one of the key publication was this at the bottom here, City Made by People, where it was very obvious that these, what we call informal settlement, unplanned settlements, in fact, are fairly well planned. I've seen people firsthand choosing very carefully where to build their house, spatially and in connection to infrastructure, as well as being out of the sight of authorities so they feel protected. I'll leave it here, and hopefully that has contributed somehow to show the influence of John Turner to me personally and the communities I've worked on. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thanks very much indeed, Luan. That's very, very interesting and comprehensive summary of the impact in Tirana and Albania generally. When I was studying, when I was at school in the 1950s, I was reading a geography textbook, and I'll never forget, it started off describing the countries of Europe, and it said, A, Albania. Albania is the poorest country in Europe. B, Belgium. I've never forgotten that since the 1950s. So I was really curious to know about Albania. And I was very privileged about 10 years ago to be able to go there on a project and see what was happening. And as you say, Luan, the progress that's been achieved since the 1950s and the end of the Hoxha regime has been phenomenal. And I think one of the interesting things is, as you say, the degree of local initiative by the mayor, who inherited all these old communist buildings, grey concrete apartment blocks, and introduced painters, invited artists to paint these buildings, a whole riot of colors. If you Google Tirana colors, you'll see these massive examples of how he literally brought color into people's lives and enhanced the sense of community. I gather revenues increased, and he's now, of course, Prime Minister. So it just does show that bottom up can work politically as well as environmentally. But the other point that I take away from what you were saying is that, you know, people create places. They don't just build houses. And it's the sense of place that often reflects the cultural priorities of different communities in different parts of the world, in ways which elitist groups who are increasingly responsible for doing planning in areas where the values are very different to the standard conventional ways of thinking often get overlooked. So many, many thanks indeed for that. And also, I think, Luan, your other contribution is that you're representing the younger generation today, which is really very, very welcome. One of the younger
Not so sure that the young Jeffrey.
It's good to know that John's message is passing from generation to generation, as well as from different groups and countries. Now I'd like to invite, I think Graham is here.
Sorry, can I disturb you, Jeff?
Sure.
We have Kirti here. This is, we have about half an hour left. We have in all 29 people. We had understood that there'll be 9 people, so there are 20 more. We have just covered about 7 or 8. And we have just about half an hour, unless we decide to extend this meeting for another half an hour. We will have to kind of, decide how do we proceed now onwards, because
right. Yeah,
lots of people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Kirti. We've just got Graham Bristol as the other contributor who has kindly agreed. I'm looking for him on the screen. Yes, I can see you, Graham. Yeah. Over to you, if you would be so kind, having waited for so long. Many thanks.
Well, it's thank you both Kirti and Jeffrey for organizing this, and it's been great so far to hear everybody else speaking about John and how he has affected their lives, and certainly that's the case for me as well. I came to Turner, of course, through Freedom to Build. And that was not too long after I started architecture school in 1974. And that was in Vancouver at UBC. And I'm not quite sure how I came to Freedom to Build, but it may have, because it certainly wasn't on the syllabus of any of my classes. And I still think that's a problem we have in architectural education. Particularly considering, you know, the profound and positive effect it had on both my personal and professional life. I do feel fortunate that I did find it amidst the stacks of the more traditional writing on architecture. I came to architecture with a degree in English and philosophy. And as a result of that, I gravitated more towards the theoretical end of the profession. But reading Le Corbusier or even the 20th century manifestos or Venturi's postmodern apologia, well, it left me with very little enthusiasm. But Turner's Freedom to Build did. It may have been the first article or series I read in architectural design. And I was very happy to see that more than one of you had your copies still of AD. But in any case, it was through Freedom to Build that the value of architecture began to make some sense to me. Here, I found something that related much more directly to people and to a sense of justice and how architecture could be part of that struggle for freedom. And to use one of his terms, enabling architecture shaped from the bottom up in and by communities. That book helped me connect architecture to political philosophy as well, and to a fundamental question: who is architecture for? And Housing by People certainly reinforced an answer to that question. And as luck would have it, the preface by Colin Ward opened yet another door. And that was a short walk then to Kropotkin and Mutual Aid, Bakunin, Emma Goldman, Illich, Butchkin, and lots of others. As those ideas developed, I began to understand, you know, the political nature of architecture and, well, related to that, the inadequacies of professional ethics, and similarly, the inadequacies of architectural education. And all of those issues I still continue to work on. As luck would have it, though, because I was at UBC, at the end of my second year, UN Habitat came to town. And with that, the Habitat Forum, which was far more interesting than the official conference. One of the many luminaries, and this has already been mentioned, was John Turner, along with Illich and others. I've had the occasion to say many times since then, I learned more about the possibilities of an alternative architecture at UN Habitat than I ever learned in school. And this is indeed what I was looking for. There were many thousands of people at that Habitat Forum who shared a similar vision, I would say. And we were trying to understand what we could do with that set of skills that we were learning. And that was nearly 50 years ago now. Since then, I've been working and learning and teaching to advance what I learned from Turner at that point and since, which leads me to one final point, I would say, and that it has to do with the Pritzker Prize is regarded as one of the most prestigious honors for architects, and perhaps within the field of architecture it is, but I believe there is a greater honor, and that is the Right Livelihood Award. I was looking at their website this morning, and because it's still early morning here, And what the website says is our award aims to boost urgent and long-term social change. We do this by recognizing the actions of brave visionaries working for a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world for all. John Turner won that award in 1988. And now as I sit on the far side, you might say, of the arc of my own life, I have happily learned a great deal from him, and I'm really grateful for the direction his writing and example have given me. Thanks. You're
Please
muted.
unmute.
Jeff, unmute. Jeff, unmute.
Sorry, that's a wonderful note, Graham, on which to bring the presentations that we've got listed to an end. Because what you really demonstrated is really what is architecture for? What are the built environment professions for? If we're not there to meet the needs of the vast majority of people. And that people should not be having to achieve their own developments through their own initiatives against the system, but in harmony with it. And the fact that you highlighted the Right Livelihood Award, which John won, and the fact that that is to boost urgent social change and build a more just and peaceful world, could not be more timely than it is today, when we're all finding it very difficult, frankly, and many of us, I know, to turn on the news, because it is so depressing and frightening and gives so little cause for hope. Now, I think of myself as an optimist, because I don't think I agree with Churchill, the fact that why would you bother to be anything else? There's no point. But it is a really challenging time at the moment for optimists. And that's why we all need to stick together. And I think, Kirti, you've done brilliantly in organizing this. It's unfortunate that some people have not been able to follow up the full session today because of the initial internet technical problem. But for those of us who have been here today, I hope I speak for all of you when I say it's been a really great afternoon, a great couple of hours, a great chance to reunite with people and friends that maybe we've lost touch with over the years, and to take the issues forward as strongly and positively and collectively as we can, and to reinforce each other's efforts, because none of us can do these things on our own. But John lit the torch, which we're all now hoping to hold and shine light on things. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, Kirti. Unless anyone else has anything final points to make, which you're very welcome to do.
Geoff,
Sure.
sorry. I think, first of all, we have 20 minutes and we have good number of people who have not spoken at all.
Great.
And I suggest that we also have another session day after tomorrow on the 1st of November. If they could join, that is wonderful. But if they cannot, let us kind of hear from them very briefly. I think their perspective or the experiences of John Turner. So can we really kind of go ahead very, very quickly? The list of the people that we have. I see Mike Slingby there. I see Eberhard Knapp there. I see Bob Davidson there. I see Ruth. Also, I think Barry Pinsky, I think, So shall we start then very quickly?
Yeah, and
Barry?
Gemra also, I see.
Yes, if possible.
Yeah, Barry. And Barry, can you hear me? Okay, not Ruth.
Barry's listed Wednesday.
Are you there?
Kirti, I'm here, but this is Barry.
Wow.
I'm really still thinking about the things I want to say and want to do a bit more preparing. So I'm happy to take my slot on Wednesday.
I think
Okay,
we've
thank
got
you. Thank you
Gemma
very
willing
much.
to speak now.
Yes, I just want to contribute very shortly.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Please carry on.
Okay. I am Cemre, and I got to know John Turner through his work on informal housing in Peru, and through his book as well, Freedom to Build. And I myself, I'm doing my PhD in Germany, but about Ankara, the capital city of Turkey, which also experienced the informality in the 70s. And I'm actually benefiting from Jeffrey's work in these years in Ankara. So therefore, I'm following Jeff, who is my valuable mentor, but I am also somehow started to follow John Turner's steps as well, because the informality is a main issue in that time for Turkey too. But I just want to add that the situation could change differently over the years, because we started as in Turkey, we start something maybe in common, but then the legalization process took over everything, and authorization process affected this informality process, but in a good way and in a mutual benefited way, let's say. And now this situation is most of these informal housing places are rebuilt and reconstructed. Maybe it, of course, it wasn't that nice for the community and the people, but maybe these neighborhoods also needed some physical improvements too. But and I just, to be honest, I just started to get to know him, John Turner, closely and his works. But it is very enlightening for me, and I would like to thank you very much for this event and organization, because otherwise maybe we would just skip it, and then I don't know, we follow him somehow, but it is good to keep it alive. Thank you for that organization. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Gemma.
Thank you. Can we have Forbes Davison? Forbes, are you there? And can you come in? Yeah, Forbes.
Yeah, hello. I'm there. I look very ghostly, but never mind. Yeah, I'm also going to be giving a session on Wednesday.
Oh.
So let me just say something very briefly now, and I'll leave it at that. For me, I first sort of worked with John Turner in 1975, and he made a short but very important input on the work we did in Ismailia in Egypt. And basically that input set the whole direction of thinking of how to work with informal settlement. Personally, I was really unaware of the whole approach. So for me, it was a very fundamental shift. And that work influenced the lives of, now probably in Ismailia, say 160,000 people. So it was something that started very small, but really built into the mainstream. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is how to get those ideas into the mainstream normal way of working. And one thing that happened in Egypt was locally, let's say the approach was fully adopted and implemented over quite a considerable period. But at a national level, that same shift never really took place. Locally, there are still people working in Ismailia who are using the same approach. So that's the personal connection. But I think what we're all facing is, how you get this into really the large scale mainstream, because that's the important way that things can work. For me, the the other influence from that was very much then through education. And it's nice to see the connections that you have. For example, I worked for many years with IHS. IHS worked first through the master's program, and then with CoPlan for many years. And then the sort of connections that you're seeing in Albania, you can again trace them back from a different way back into John's teachings. I think I'd like to leave it there just now, but say, to me, it was amazing how a relatively short connection and input made a very, very significant impact over time. But I'm concerned these days, if I'm lecturing and I say, who's heard of John Turner? And you get a lot of blank faces. So maybe we have to really do more evangelizing to get his profile up again and let people really realize how significant his thinking is. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Very, very good.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Bob. Ruth,
Jeff,
would you have some time?
I will, totally unprepared. But
Yeah, Ruth.
I first met John, I think in probably 1987, which was the International Year of Shelter for the Homeless. And I sort of veered from one version of him to another. I remember going, 1987 was such a crazy year. And I'd set up something called the Construction Resource and Development Centre in Jamaica, and I'd also started something called the Women's Construction Collective. And because there was a sort of shortage of issue, projects or approaches that could be called gender sensitive, suddenly I found that the Women's Construction Collective, which was a sort of project, became terribly sexy. And we got contacted to work with Bertha, John's wife, on documenting what had happened with getting women into construction in Jamaica, which had been extremely successful. So it was fun to do. But I think because of that exposure, I certainly found myself being invited to all sorts of crazy places. I mean, I was sent to MIT, which is where I think I first met Jeff, and we went to Nairobi, and we went to Sweden, and all over the place. It was like a sort of it was like a circus tour, it seemed to me. And I wasn't an architect, and I didn't understand the language. All I knew was that I was working in informal settlements and working in the construction industry. And I was quite angry about issues that were going on, particularly around land. And I suppose I was quite active as well, and I was probably rather loud, which didn't necessarily change over time. But I remember that one of the things that was terrific about John, because sometimes I thought he was, I come out of things and I think, what on earth was he talking about? It was just like I couldn't make head or tail of it. And then and other times you come out and you just say, genius, exactly what I needed. And he was the first person to introduce me to Venn diagrams. And I can't tell you how useful Venn diagrams turned out to be in terms of exploring options for strategic partnerships between communities, public sector, and to some extent the market as well. That it gave a form to explore the possibilities as well as the problematics of relationships. And I think the strongest thing that I took away from John, and until recently I taught the housing program at DPU. And that program always began with an introduction to John. And I can't remember exactly the quote, I haven't got it in front of me, but it was about the significance in housing of relationships, that housing was essentially about forming and building and creating and understanding through relationships. And that made housing and settlement development accessible to me, because when I went to MIT, they asked me to bring blueprints. Well, I didn't have blueprints. I wouldn't have known how to produce a blueprint. I didn't understand the language, but John's language was accessible to somebody who was an activist who hadn't been trained in formal design of any kind. I think the other thing was that I was actually at the Right Livelihoods award ceremony when John received his award, and to see John there with the other people who received awards was a sort of wake up call. Was a wake up call for me.
Yeah, I called, but I text back, so I'm just starting to
Tony,
look at
I'm
the
listening to
methodology
you.
now.
Tony, I can hear everything you're saying.
Just looking at what's already in the Inception report and how we can add to that, basically.
Tony,
all right, so let's. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, no, I just wanted, the last thing I wanted to say was actually that John actually brought to the forefront the importance of collective capacity. And a lot of the time we talk about, spontaneous incremental development and so forth, but actually the real challenge of building collective capacity, and Barry will know a lot more of this, needs huge attention, because there's a danger that people think, well, every communities just spring up and they can just do it and leave it to them, and they'll get their act together and so forth. And sure, there's a lot of truth in that, but actually the art, in a way, of fostering collective organizational capacities is a tremendously important factor, I think, in making the relationships work that don't just allow a bottom-up approach, but actually allow for a handshake between bottom-up and top-down. Because the reality is that you need those vertical linkages to be structurally sort of caught and made productive in terms of what people want. And you also need tremendous horizontal linkages. So it's a big challenge. And I think it was just great to have had him come into my life at that time and be such a crazy and inspirational character. My last image of him was he came just after I'd come to England and started Homeless International. He decided to come and visit us in Coventry, when at the time Homeless International's office was a bedroom in my house. And we weren't really geared to entertaining important people. And he arrived and said, well, John, I'm afraid we were actually going out, because it's November the 5th. We're going out to a sort of whole bonfire night. He said, yes. And he came out with us and just had a marvelous time enjoying the fireworks and the children and everything going on. So he was a fun guy and an important guy. And I'm very grateful to have had him somewhere in my life.
Great.
Thank you, Ruth. We have 3-4 more minutes, and we probably could take one more person. Could be Ashna Singh.
It must be in the middle of the night where you are, Mike. Have you got something you'd like to say?
Ashna, can you come in? Geoff, we just take one more and then finish it. Ashna Singh.
Can I just come in?
Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, come in. Please come in.
Is it okay if I just pop in for a few minutes? Yeah, well, it's wonderful to hear about John again. I got to know John years ago when I was studying architecture at Stuttgart University, and we went on a postgraduate or whatever 6 months, 4 months, I don't know, course for housing at the DPU. You've all spoken about his achievements, his legacy. I'll just give you 2 examples of what it meant to me in the end. I deviated a lot from housing and developing countries for initially, but then I landed up at a place which some of you might know, the KfW, German Development Bank. Now, that place is about something similar to World Bank or AFD or whatever, and so they're normally very you do a project quickly and finish it and go off and spend more money somewhere else. I remember 2 projects. One, Kirti, that's where I met Kirti for the first time, was in Buj. There was a big earthquake, a horrible one, many years ago, but you might still remember it. And we were partnering with the HFDC, Housing and Finance Development Company or something, DB Bank in Mumbai. And then we sat there with it. That was still without consultants, without Kirti and this other guy, Dr. Willem. And then this manager at the bank said, listen, we must develop one prototype house. And then we just build 100 or 500 of them, and we put them around in the new areas so that the people can have housing. And I was often quoted about this afterwards. And I said, over my dead body.
I can't show.
Sorry? Okay, so that's how it
continue.
Sorry? They wanted to build...
Please continue.
And in the end, together with Kirti Shah and another team, wonderful team, I think we did some excellent rehabilitation, in situ rehabilitation of destroyed houses where the owners and the previous inhabitants were very closely involved. As far as I know, Kirti, you might know more. You're closer to it in Ahmedabad. It was a success. And the other one was a similar one. I mean, I had quite a few of these disaster projects. Another one was a similar one after the tsunami. We were going to rebuild or help Sri Lanka, and we were given a project the German government funded a project on the eastern shore of the island, Batikaloa and Ampara. There also, Kirti, you were closely involved. And the general framework that was given out, we don't build where those houses have been washed away or where the places have been destroyed. No, we have to go, I think, 500 meters or 1,000 meters beyond the shore and rebuild there. And there again, somehow we succeeded in doing quite the opposite of what the Sri Lankan government that had prescribed. And we built with Kirti's strong support. We rebuilt. We developed a system whereby the homeowners could get construction materials and had technical advice, and they could rebuild their houses. And this too, I was there a few years back, and I saw a lot of, well, not a lot, but 2 or 3 large settlements which had been done, little red houses strewn over a square kilometer, one row after the other, empty. And I went down to Batikaloa and Ampara, and they still seemed to be quite happy in there. I mean, I didn't, you couldn't identify the rebuilt and those who had survived there. So I think those were, for me, I always thought this, what I'd learned with at the DPU, and which I'd read about later on, that was an impact on an international scale, which was tremendous. And I thank, in retrospect, John, very much for teaching me, letting me understand this approach. Thank you.
Thank you. It's 9 o'clock, and I think we had decided to do this for 2 hours. Now, what I suggest is this: that we are doing this again day after tomorrow, exactly at the same time. That's on 1st November, and if you could join, it would be most interesting. We're extremely sorry we have not been able to kind of find time for few of you who very much like to kind of speak and give tribute to John. But please make time for this event day after tomorrow. Please come back, and we see to it. Probably we'll manage it better next time, and see that everyone has an opportunity to say their thing. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for being so inspiring. Thank you very much, for giving this detailed account of your interaction, learning from John, and look forward to seeing you again, some of you, and of course, few more new faces day after tomorrow, exactly at the same time. And we will see that we don't have technical problem. Ashna, you were saying something.
It was just, are you going to be sending another link out, or is it because when you tried to register, you couldn't get the second session?
The same link, which will also work day after tomorrow. But we will once again try and see, because this link had a problem today. We will see that we reach you a fresh link as well. But thank you for being here, and thank you very much. It's an excellent, rewarding evening listening to you all. Thank you again. Thank you.
Okay.
Gertie and Jeff, thank you very much indeed from Mike Slingsby in Phnom Penh. I would perhaps add a few words to the next session day after tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, Mike, please come back.
Thank you so much.
Will do.
Welcome. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.